You ever have a moment where your entire brain just short circuits? Like someone flipped the stupid switch on your reality. That was me, standing in my flannel robe with a half-toasted bagel in one hand and a garden trowel in the other, staring at the HOA block party flyer that proudly announced locally sourced goat BBQ hosted by Kerren J. Birchfield. I blinked once, twice. My brain did that buffering thing like an old Windows computer from 1998, because right there, front and center, was a picture of a goat, my goat, wearing her pink sun hat, smiling like she was part of the catering. And that's when I knew this wasn't just another HOA overstep. No, this question mark. This was war. Now look, I've lived in Whispering Pines for 22 years. That's 2 decades, 3 HOA coups, and more passive-aggressive bake-offs than I care to count. I've survived Kerren's lemon squares of doom, the time she tried to enforce mandatory decorative gravel, and even the Great Lawn Flamingo ban of 2016. But stealing my goat for a barbecue? That was a line-crossing, soul-rattling, neighbor-nuking offense. Penelope, yes, my goat had a name, and yes, she answered to it, wasn't just some barnyard ornament. She was family, a gentle, slightly sarcastic old soul who'd been with me through 2 failed marriages, the death of my pet cockatiel, and a brief but passionate obsession with competitive jigsaw puzzling. She was emotional support, emotional chaos, and pure farmyard fabulousness wrapped into one hoofed, hat-wearing diva. And now she was on a skewer somewhere next to Kerren's smug smile and those god-awful gluten-free burger buns she brags about at every HOA potluck. It all began a few weeks before the barbecue. Penelope had been enjoying her usual routine: morning oats, midday tantrum at the mailman, and her 3 p.m. meditation under the old oak tree. She loved attention, hated squirrels, and had a deep philosophical hatred for Kerren, probably because Kerren once called her a walking allergy at a board meeting, but I never imagined it would escalate to goat napping. That morning I stepped out to refill Penelope's water bowl and found her leash unhooked. No sounds, no hoofbeats, just her pink sun hat lying in the grass like a miniature crime scene. At first, I thought maybe she'd escaped again, like the time she broke into George's koi pond and took a bubble bath, but something felt off. There were footprints, human, Prada sandals, if I had to guess, glittery, pink, definitely Kerren's. And then, as if the universe wanted to slap me across the face with confirmation, a flyer fluttered by and smacked against my leg. Join us for the first annual HOA Garden BBQ, featuring locally sourced goat with a smiling clip art goat wearing a sun hat. I kid you not, I stormed down the street in my robe like a man possessed. The flyer crumpled in my fist, my bagel tragically forgotten. I stomped all the way to Kerren's yard, where smoke was already puffing out of the world's most pretentious portable grill setup. She was in full Stepford mode, hair sprayed within an inch of its life, wearing her monogrammed apron that said Grill Queen, like this was some kind of Martha Stewart crime scene. I demanded to know where my goat was. She just blinked at me and said, "Oh, that goat?" I assumed she was abandoned. She was out wandering with no supervision. According to the bylaws, unattended livestock is subject to impound. I stared at her. I'm pretty sure one of my eye twitches became permanent right then. Impound. This woman had stolen Penelope, turned her into entree, and now she was quoting bylaws at me while flipping kebabs. I tried calling animal control. They laughed. I called the sheriff. He said he was busy dealing with a cat stuck in a grill fan. Not mine, thankfully. I even tried the local news tips line. They told me to try again when there were fewer goats involved. I was alone, a man, a lawn, and the ghost of a goat. So I went back home, sat on my porch swing with my unfinished bagel, and stared at the empty leash post like a war widow. And that's when the rage simmered down just enough for clarity to bubble up. I didn't need animal control. I didn't need the law. What I needed was revenge. Petty, methodical, glorious revenge. I didn't want an apology. I wanted Kerren's world to unravel one throw pillow at a time. You steal my goat, Kerren? Fine, I'll steal your sanity. Slowly, quietly. Like a fart in a sealed car. Now, let me make one thing clear. I'm not a naturally vengeful man. I do crossword puzzles. I plant tomatoes. I watch reruns of Murder, She Wrote. But if you back me into a corner and roast my emotional support animal, then congratulations. You've unlocked my final form. Grumpy old man with nothing to lose and too much free time. I spent that evening assembling a team. Mildred, our neighborhood conspiracy theorist, who once claimed the pool was being used by Russian spies, was in charge of intelligence. George, the retired electrician with a hearing aid he uses selectively, was tech support. And Bob, well, Bob had a crowbar and an axe to grind after Kerren denied his request to build a garden gnome fountain. He was our muscle. We met in my garage, lit a citronella candle, and made a pact. Operation Goat Storm had begun. Our first move was surveillance. Mildred set up a telescope behind her hydrangeas, which she claimed also doubled as a listening device. George rigged up a doorbell cam that live streamed directly to my tablet. I started cataloging every time Kerren left her house, who visited, what was delivered, kept notes. We had charts. Bob kept trying to add glitter bombs to the plan, but I told him to hold off until phase 3. And in the meantime, I began the slow, soul-crushing, bureaucratic torture that only someone with decades of HOA experience could inflict. Every day, I submitted a new complaint. Improper grass height, overuse of decorative flamingos, suspicious garden gnome placement. I printed the bylaws, highlighted random sections, and mailed them to her anonymously with passive-aggressive sticky notes. She was getting nervous. You could see it in her eyes. We were just warming up. Then came the fake invitations. Mildred made copies of Kerren's BBQ flyer and edited it to say, "Free goat, meat for all, sponsored by PETA." We handed them out at the mall, the church parking lot, even the petting zoo. By the end of the week, Kerren had protesters on her lawn with signs that said, "Let goats live," and "Honk if you love hooves." She called the HOA emergency board meeting. I attended wearing a black veil and a shirt that said, "Justice for Penelope." The vote to suspend all HOA events until further notice passed 4-1. Guess who the one was? That night, I toasted my bagel, poured myself a glass of prune juice, and sat back. The war had just begun. You ever seen a grown woman unravel because of a garden gnome? I have, and I was holding the binoculars. But let me tell you, watching Kerren spiral into suburban madness was not only therapeutic, it was a slow-cooked masterpiece of revenge, tenderized with pettiness and glazed with old man stubbornness. After her goat BBQ gate scandal turned her lawn into a picket line parade, Kerren tried to bounce back. She really did. She doubled down on her control freakery, launched a new HOA campaign called Order, Unity, and Curb Appeal, and started passive-aggressively planting marigolds in a smile pattern. It would have been impressive if it weren't so insufferably fake. But I wasn't fooled. You don't eat a man's goat and then rebrand as a neighborhood savior. No, ma'am. I was just getting started, and Kerren, oh sweet delusional Kerren, was about to realize that you don't mess with a man who alphabetizes his pill organizer and has a grudge older than the internet. The next phase of my grand conspiracy was simple. Psychological warfare. You know, the subtle kind. The kind where the victim slowly begins to question if the universe is out to get them. Mildred, our queen of covert chaos, was in charge of random disturbances. Every night at 2:47 a.m. she'd walk by Kerren's house dragging a plastic rake along the sidewalk like some sort of retired crypt keeper. George programmed a motion sensor to play faint goat bleats anytime someone walked past her mailbox. And Bob, oh sweet, mildly unhinged Bob, took it upon himself to place a single hoofprint made of chalk on her driveway every morning. Just one, always, in a different spot. No explanation. By week 2, Kerren had installed 3 security cameras, bought a Ring doorbell, and filed a noise complaint against phantom goats. I couldn't have been prouder, but that wasn't enough. No, I wanted her paranoia to bloom like an HOA-approved hydrangea. So I filed an anonymous request to rename the neighborhood park to Penelope's Place. When it was approved, because Mildred is secretly on the Parks Committee and has dirt on everyone. We held a memorial for Penelope ceremony. We had printed programs. We had candles. George played Ave Maria on the kazoo. A local teen dressed in a goat costume released biodegradable balloons, and right there in the front row, surrounded by confused neighbors and one very enthusiastic vegan, was Kerren, clutching her pearls and looking like she'd seen a ghost in Cloven Hove. She stormed out halfway through the slideshow I made, which featured Penelope in her best sunhats set to Sarah McLachlan's Angel. It was, if I may say so, performance art. But revenge isn't just about spectacle, it's about patience, and I had nothing but time. So I turned my attention to the HOA bylaws, which I had memorized back in 2013 during a particularly boring winter. I started poking holes in Kerren's leadership, publicly, politely, and with the innocent smile of a man who had accidentally CC'd the entire neighborhood on an email titled Concerns about Conflict of Interest in HOA Leadership, a discussion. I attached a 14-page PDF with charts and footnotes. Suddenly, Kerren's little kingdom of mulch, fines and paint, shade regulations began to crumble. People started asking questions. People who, until recently, had thought HOA meetings were just excuses to eat cupcakes and gossip about whose grandkid got arrested for TikTok pranks. But now they were showing up with clipboards and frowns. Democracy, baby. Still, Kerren wasn't backing down. She tried to fight back with the only weapon she knew: petty regulations. I got a warning for my wind chimes being too whimsical. Bob was cited for gnome congestion. Mildred's lawn was deemed suspiciously vibrant. It was clear she was lashing out, so we decided it was time for the next level, the sabotage phase. It started with the sprinklers. George, being a retired electrician and low-key mischievous genius, rigged the timing system in Kerren's yard so that the sprinklers would randomly go off during her yoga sessions. Then we moved on to deliveries. Using a burner email, Mildred signed Kerren up for every free sample she could find. Adult diapers, goat food, male enhancement pills, glitter-covered Christian rock CDs, you name it. Her porch looked like the lost and found section of a Florida truck stop. We even submitted a request for a support alpaca visit from a therapy farm. When they showed up with a trailer full of smelly drama, she screamed so loud it triggered 3 different car alarms. The alpaca pooped on her azaleas. It was divine. But the real pièce de résistance, the neighborhood newsletter. You see, each month, the HOA newsletter featured a spotlight article on a local resident. And this month, thanks to some creative editing from yours truly, with a little Photoshop help from George, the front page read, "Meet Kerren, BBQ queen turned goat napper." It featured a fake interview where Kerren explained her passion for grilling misunderstood livestock and reinventing trauma as flavor. I even included a recipe for Penelope's pulled goat tacos with a disclaimer that said, "Not recommended for emotional support animals." I slipped copies into every mailbox at 4 a.m. while wearing a camouflage robe and orthopedic slippers. The backlash was immediate. Even the neighborhood kids stopped waving at her. By this point, I should have felt satisfied. I mean, she was humiliated. Her porch was a zoo. Her social standing was in free fall. But there was still one thing I needed: an apology, a real one, not a half-baked, HOA-approved, legally scrubbed statement. I wanted genuine remorse. So naturally, I broke into her backyard. Now, before you clutch your pearls, I didn't technically break in. Her gate was unlocked, and I had gloves on. I just needed one thing to complete my emotional art piece: the metal goat sculpture she had installed next to her grill as some sick, twisted tribute to Penelope. I removed it, gently repainted it pink, tied Penelope's sunhat to it, and left it on her lawn with a note that said, "She may be gone, but she will never be forgotten." Then I placed a Bluetooth speaker underneath it that played soft goat bleats on a loop. Tasteful, moving, disturbing, all at once. The next morning, I sat on my porch with my new bagel, lightly toasted this time, watching Kerren open her door. She stared at the sculpture for a full 5 minutes. No movement, no sound, just pure, frozen horror. Then she screamed. A long, guttural, soap opera widow kind of scream that echoed down the block, and sent 2 squirrels scrambling up a telephone pole. She stormed inside, slammed the door, and for the rest of the day, not a single curtain moved. Victory? Not yet. But oh, we were close. You'd think by now Kerren would have waved the white flag, handed me a fruit basket, and cried on my porch about goat-related regrets. But no, Kerren wasn't done. In fact, the morning after the statue incident, which I considered a tasteful goat memorial thank you very much, she did the unthinkable. She retaliated, and not with something reasonable, like a ceasefire email or an apology cake. She escalated. She filed a formal lawsuit against me. The claim? Emotional sabotage, harassment, and unlawful redistribution of HOA art installations. HOA art installation. That's what she called the goat statue. I laughed so hard I almost popped a rib, but the suit was real, complete with documents, a hearing date, and a list of grievances long enough to qualify as a novella. She even itemized emotional damages. Itemized, like it was a grocery receipt of pain. Now, I'll admit, I didn't plan for legal drama. I'd expected passive aggression, maybe a petty fine, but not a full-blown court date. So I did what any sensible man would do. I called in the only lawyer I could afford, Carl, my cousin's ex-husband, who used to do bankruptcy law before he got disbarred for reasons that remain hazy and slightly shady. Carl now runs a fishing supply shop, but assured me he could whip up a legal-looking defense if I promised to buy 3 coolers and a novelty mug. Done deal. With Carl on retainer, I prepped for my hearing like it was the courtroom scene in A Few Good Men. I practiced monologues in the mirror. I wore a tie for the first time in a decade. Mildred created a slideshow titled The Psychological Toll of Goat Theft, a case study. Bob made a sculpture entirely out of expired meat to represent Penelope's suffering. George wrote a theme song. It was all wildly unhelpful but deeply supportive in the way only confused senior citizens can be. The day of the hearing, I strutted into the HOA hall like it was my personal revenge runway. Kerren sat across the room, surrounded by a posse of Stepford friends who all wore matching sun hats. A direct insult, if you ask me. Her lawyer looked like he'd rather be golfing. As proceedings began, Kerren stood up and gave a teary speech about how she was a victim of targeted harassment, and how the goat was unattended and hostile, and how the barbecue was a misunderstanding born from poor livestock registration. I coughed the word delusional into my elbow. When it was my turn, I delivered what I thought was a stirring testimony about betrayal, barnyard grief, and the enduring bond between man and goat. I may have cried. I may have dramatically held up Penelope's pink sun hat like it was a sacred relic. Mildred hit the lights for dramatic effect. George cued the theme song. It was a moment. And yet, despite the theatrics, the board was divided. Half were clearly Team Goat. The other half looked terrified of Kerren. The president called a recess and said they'd reconvene in a week with a verdict. A week. That's 7 days of uncertainty, simmering tension, and unchecked suburban nonsense. So naturally, I spent that week pushing every HOA rule to its limit. I held a goat remembrance karaoke night on my front lawn. I rewrote the lyrics to Sweet Caroline, so it became Sweet Penelope. I hired a teenager to dress as a goat and silently walk past Kerren's window at dusk. I even launched a petition to rename our HOA from Whispering Pines to Bleating Pines. We got 46 signatures, only needed 4 more to submit it. Democracy was on my side, vengeance too, but then things got weird. On day 5 of Rissy's week, I got a knock on my door. It was Sherry, Kerren's next-door neighbor, and one of the few people in the neighborhood who still knew how to operate a fax machine. She looked nervous, like a woman about to commit social treason. "You didn't hear this from me," she whispered, slipping me an envelope. Inside was a photo, grainy, zoomed in, of what looked suspiciously like a livestock trailer parked behind Kerren's garage. The timestamp? The night before the BBQ. The trailer had a farm logo on it. I googled it. A local goat sanctuary, and then it clicked. Kerren hadn't cooked Penelope. She'd sold her illegally, quietly. She hadn't BBQ'd my goat. She'd fenced her like a 4-legged antique. My emotions went haywire. Relief, fury, confusion, more fury. Penelope might still be alive? How dare she sell my goat like she was some unclaimed thrift store item? I called the sanctuary immediately and posed as Gary, a potential donor with a love for hats and goats. The woman on the phone said yes, they had recently acquired a pink hat-wearing goat from a woman named Kerren, or Kerren, something with too many consonants. I nearly dropped the phone. I begged for details. The woman said she'd have to check records, but assured me the goat was thriving, slightly dramatic, and fond of classical music. That was Penelope. That was my girl. Fueled by a new sense of purpose, I cancelled my prank plans for the rest of the week and focused on recovery. I convinced Bob to drive me to the sanctuary. He agreed, but only if he could wear his goat dad tank top. Fine. We pulled up to the sanctuary on Saturday, and there she was, standing in the sun, nibbling on celery like she'd just retired from a modeling career. Penelope, my queen. I called her name. She turned, ears twitching, hat slightly askew, and then, I swear on my vintage lawn chair, she sprinted toward me, full speed, hooves pounding like a weird little drumline. She headbutted me in the knee and licked my hand. We were reunited. Turns out, the sanctuary had no idea she was stolen. Kerren had claimed she was a stray rescue and they'd taken her in with no questions. I showed them photos, videos, the sunhat collection. The proof was undeniable. I filled out some forms, made a small donation, and loaded Penelope into Bob's trailer like a very fancy prisoner of war. We drove home in victorious silence, save for the occasional bleat of satisfaction from the back. But now came the pièce de résistance, the final act, the closure. I waited until the day of the verdict hearing. I arrived early, wore a suit, carried a leash. Kerren was already there, looking smug, surrounded by her sunhat squad. I said nothing, sat quietly. Then, as the board began reading their preliminary findings, I stood up and said, "Excuse me before you decide. I'd like to introduce an important witness." And then I whistled. Penelope trotted into the room like she owned the place, hat freshly washed, hooves polished. She stopped in front of Kerren, stared her down, and pooped right there on the carpet, a steaming symbol of justice. The room erupted. The board didn't even finish reading the verdict. Kerren tried to argue, screamed about defamation by goat and poop terrorism, but no one was listening. People were taking pictures. George was crying. Mildred clapped so hard her bingo bracelet flew off. Bob handed out flyers for Penelope's Welcome Home BBQ. No actual BBQ. Kerren stormed out, her sunhat flopping in rage. And just like that, we won. There are few sweeter sounds in life than the echo of Kerren's sunhat hitting the pavement as she stormed out of the HOA meeting, steam practically hissing out of her ears like a malfunctioning teapot. If I could have bottled that moment and sold it, I'd be sipping margaritas on a goat sanctuary in Maui by now. But as she disappeared into the distance, tripping over her own clipboard of fake bylaws, I knew one thing. This war was over, and I'd won. Penelope was back. The neighborhood was buzzing, and the entire HOA now saw me not just as the retired weirdo with the weird lawn gnome shrine, but as a hero, a goat-defending, justice-dealing, rule-exploiting suburban legend. I didn't just survive the HOA's wrath. I turned it into a punchline. Kerren tried to recover, of course. People like her don't just dissolve into irrelevance quietly. She filed a formal appeal, denied, launched a Facebook smear campaign, laughed at, and even tried to start a new organization called Citizens for Order Without Outrage, or COYO. Unfortunately for her, people thought it was a support group for lactose intolerance, and the only person who showed up was Dale, the guy who thinks almond milk is a government lie. Meanwhile, I hosted Penelope's homecoming picnic on the community green, complete with goat-friendly snacks, karaoke. Bob did a haunting rendition of Eye of the Tiger, and a raffle for a basket of Kerren's confiscated HOA flyers. Attendance full, vibes unmatched. Now here's the thing about revenge. It's addictive. There's something about the slow, steady dismantling of a petty tyrant's empire that tastes better than any BBQ could, goat or otherwise. But once Penelope was safely back in her custom-painted shed, pink, of course, with glitter trim, and Kerren had been publicly goat shamed. I realized something. I changed. I wasn't just a retiree with too much time on his hands anymore. I was a strategist, a disruptor, a local legend. I was, dare I say it, dangerously competent. And the more I leaned into it, the more ridiculous things got. Suddenly, the neighborhood started turning to me for leadership. Me, the guy who once got fined for having a plastic flamingo with a bow tie. Mildred nominated me for HOA president as a joke during the next election cycle, and I won by a landslide. Kerren naturally tried to protest, citing everything from emotional bias to goat fraud, but the board had had enough of her dramatics. They told her she could either accept the results or seek justice in a less goat-involved community. I framed that quote, "It's on my mantle next to Penelope's honorary tiara, don't ask." As president, my first act was to replace the AHOA's mission statement. It used to be something dry, like preserving the value and beauty of our community. I rewrote it to, "We mind our business, protect our goats, and accept that sometimes gnomes are necessary." Surprisingly, the community loved it. People loosened up. Lawns got a little wilder. Gnomes started popping up everywhere like ceramic mushrooms after a rainstorm. Even Dale stopped screaming at clouds. There was joy in whispering pines again. Well, everywhere except one house. Kerren's house turned into a cautionary tale. Nobody visited. Her once sparkly mulch beds grew dull. Her seasonal wreaths stopped updating. The sunhat squad disbanded, and one of them, Marsha, I think, started a goat yoga class that now meets in my backyard twice a week. Kerren eventually put up a "for sale" sign, but after word got out about her goat snatching past, no one bit. Even the realtor gave up and moved the sign 3 inches to the left in passive-aggressive defeat. But I wasn't bitter. In fact, I was generous. I even tried to include her in community events, invited her to No Hard Feelings Nacho Night and Gnome and Goat Gala. She never responded, but the invitations kept coming. Why? Because I believe in redemption. That. And I knew it would drive her absolutely insane. Penelope even signed the invites with a hoof print. Tasteful, symbolic, mildly taunting. And just when I thought things couldn't get better, we made headlines. Yep, the local news caught wind of the story after someone uploaded a video of Penelope's triumphant entrance at the HOA hearing to YouTube. Title: Suburban Goat Brings Down HOA Tyrant. Suburban drama at its finest. It went viral in the weird way only hyper-specific niche content can. Suddenly I was doing interviews on small-town radio. Penelope got her own Instagram. A guy in Canada made fan art. One woman sent me a knitted sweater with "Goat Dad" stitched across the chest. It was hideous. I wore it proudly. There was even talk of a documentary. Some college film student named Chase emailed me asking to do a short film on the socio-political implications of livestock in suburban power dynamics. I said yes, but only if he cast someone handsome as me. Tom Selleck was my first choice. He didn't respond, but the student made the documentary anyway, and it played at some festival with a name like Real Life in the Burbs. Mildred cried. George brought popcorn. Penelope was in the credits as herself. We got a standing ovation. Kerren did not attend. So where are we now? Well, I'm still HOA president. Mildred's now vice president of Lawn Liberty. Bob runs the neighborhood Gnome Commune, which is lesser commune and more a wildly cluttered shed where he stores weird decorations and talks to them like a ceramic therapist. George started a blog called Bleat It Like Beckham, where he rates goats around the world. Don't ask, it's strangely popular. And Penelope, she lives like royalty. She's got her own heated hut, 3 sunhats in rotation, and a diet that includes organic celery and apple slices. We even had a professional photographer come out and do a goat photo shoot. I've never seen an animal look so smug. She's earned it. As for Kerren, last I heard, she moved 2 towns over to a gated community where pets are banned, and the HOA president is a retired IRS agent. I imagine she's plotting a comeback somewhere, probably knitting a vengeful doily or creating bylaws in her sleep. But that's fine, because now I know who I am. I'm not just a man with a goat, I'm a man with a legacy. I'm the guy who took on the HOA, outwitted the tyrant, and proved once and for all that you don't mess with a man's goat and expect to walk away unscathed. I am vengeance, I am justice, I am slightly over-caffeinated and extremely petty, and I regret nothing. So if you're ever in Whispering Pines, look for the house with the glitter pink goat statue, the president lives here lawn sign, and the man on the porch sipping lemonade with a sun hat wearing goat beside him. That's me. That's Penelope. And that's what victory looks like. Slightly ridiculous, mildly illegal, and absolutely unforgettable.